Opponent grabbed the sword with his hand and responded with strong headbutts. The leader of the mermens was stunned, while Sickness advanced with his club in hand. The son of Poseidon was ready to smash the head of the champion of eons. Suddenly Achilles anticipated the deadly attack with a blow with his shield. Taking advantage of the enemy's disorientation, the hero leaped onto his back and initiated a stranglehold. The strong Pius, already strengthless, bent his knees before the great power of Achilles' arms. A demigod died, and would not be the first great warrior to fall before the mighty Achilles. Hector, realizing that he did not have enough numbers to contain the horde of invaders, ordered his men to retreat and take cover behind the walls. The Greeks celebrate their first great victory against the Trojans. The conquest of the Trojan beaches was strategically important to the campaign, and their victory was accomplished with few losses. A large funeral pyre was erected to honor Protylus, the brave warrior, who was the first Greek to set foot on those lands on behalf of the army of the Ons. He would be the first of many to die on the battlefields in the name of Greek. Honor. The Greeks had already conquered the beaches of Ilium, and the previous day's victory raised the morale of all the On warriors who believed in a quick victory against Troy. In Agamemnon's tent, the main leaders talked about an immediate assault on the walls of Troy, pondering whether this would be the most correct strategy. The moment seemed favorable, and the Trojans' courage should be shaken. Agamemnon declared that, contrary to what the oracles had predicted, Troy would fall easily and they would return home quickly. The warlords left the tent determined to storm the Trojan citadel that very day. In his chariot, Agamemnon guided the gigantic army toward the walls of Troy. Everyone marched with unwavering determination, but they still had no real sense of the obstacle they would encounter. The city of Troy was not defended by an ordinary wall. It was higher and sturdier than any other fortress in the world. This work of engineering could not have been made by human hands. Its builders were the gods Apollo and Poseidon. Contrary to what the Ons thought, the Trojan infantry stayed behind the wall, prepared to face the Greeks. Once again above the walls, hundreds of archers provided cover for the troops below. With no fear in their hearts, the Greeks advanced against their enemies, and a rain of arrows fell on their heads. The Trojans fought in a tight defense formation, while the Greek army was made weaker and weaker by the arrows falling from the sky. The Greek generals realized that a direct assault on Troy was impossible at that moment, and ordered their troops to withdraw. The Trojan commander Hector and his men celebrated after their first victory over the Greeks, showing their opponents that they would fight to the death to defend their homes and families unable to attack the walls. Directly, the Greeks opted for besieging the city and forcing it to surrender through starvation, but this strategy was not as successful as expected. Troy was a huge city and had several allies in the region who supplied the city with reinforcements and strategic resources. Therefore, the Greek blockade did not work efficiently among the Greeks. A rumor spread of a new prophecy that could change the fate of the war. Hector, son of King Priam, always led his men in the front line, but he had a younger brother named Trus. This was a boy, but his incredible skills could lead him to a glorious destiny. The boy was an excellent archer. On the ramparts, he displayed his talent, shooting his enemies with perfect accuracy. He was also a formidable horseman, riding the fast Trojan horses without saddle or reins. The intrepid boy would ride out of Troy into the countryside, unafraid of the enemies around him. A prophecy said that if Troilus reached the age of 20, he would take the place of Hector and lead Troy to victory, not to allow the consummation of the omen. The mighty Achilles volunteered to hunt down the young man who threatened the Greeks' effort. Troilus often took his horse to drink at Apollo's fountain, a sacred place with which no Greek would dare to vilify for fear of the god's fury. But upon returning to Troy, he found a terrible surprise in disguise. Achilles ambushed the boy as he was returning. Troilus turned around and tried to return to the spring, but Achilles, the light-footed warrior, ran after him, and had his horse not been so fast, he would have been caught up just as the boy was about to reach the fountain. His chest was pierced by Achilles' spear. The ruthless warrior put the young boy's body back on his horse and sent him on his way to Troy. Upon seeing the boy's dead body, the whole city wept, as if the hero Hector himself had died. One of the Trojans' hopes had simply vanished after the failure of the assault on the walls of Troy. The Greeks realized that a long siege of the city would be necessary to make the Trojans fall to their knees. Days went by, and boredom took hold of the Greek troops. In a never-ending wait, this discouragement could destroy the soldiers' morale. In the long term, the cunning Polyphemus, much admired by the soldiers, invented the game of dice, and the men were able to entertain themselves and pass the time. The Greeks began sending military expeditions to weaken Troy's neighbors and allies, who often sent supplies and men to reinforce the Trojan positions. The heroic Ons who took part in these adventures had as their greatest desire to plunder the treasures of these cities and to improve their positions compared to the other Greek chieftains. Meanwhile, on the beaches of Iliad, the stocks of food for the troops were dangerously low, but with the return of Polyphemus and his fleet with grain, oil, and meat from sea, this critical situation was settled. The soldiers chanted songs in honor of Polyphemus. He, in the eyes of the common men, was the only nobleman who cared about the welfare of the plebs. Agamemnon began to feel threatened by Polyphemus' growing prestige, carried on his shoulders by the people, but suddenly rumors emerged that cast doubt on Polyphemus' loyalty to the Greek, cause no one knows from where. These rumors emerged that accused Polyphemus of being a traitor. Because of these suspicions, evidence was sought in Polyphemus' tent. Agamemnon's men tried to find evidence of this supposed treason. Good amount of Trojan gold. Agamemnon read everyone the contents of a message that thanked them for the information passed on to Troy, and the message contained the seal of the Trojan royal house. This message was supposed to have been found in the hands of a Trojan messenger. Polyphemus struggled as he was stopped by Agamemnon's men. He shouted that the whole thing was just a set-up. Greek chiefs demanded that he confess, and others called him a traitor. Polyphemus was tied to a pole and sentenced to death by stoning, the most degrading and dishonorable way to die. Before ordering the execution, Agamemnon asked Polyphemus if he wished to say his last words. He said that he was not afraid of death, but that he felt sorry for the truth which would die before him. Polyphemus was stoned, and his body would have been thrown to the dogs and vultures had it not been for the intervention of Achilles and Ajax. P.S.'s father, feeling outraged, took his son's entire army back to Greece and promised to tell his countrymen of all the wrongdoings committed by the Greeks in their campaign abroad. He would spread news that while the wives of the Greek chieftain suffered lonely at home, their husbands delighted in the beautiful and enslaved female enemies, treating them as their true wives. They would punish their husbands for adultery, and the most passionate ones even took their own music lives. The city of Troy had allied troops from all over the region. The goal was to prepare a great counterattack against the Greek troops besieging the city. On the horizon, a huge contingent of reinforcements emerged. It was the army of the Dardanians, led by old Anchises, brother of King Priam, and his son Onus, who commanded his father's soldiers on the battlefield. From the top of the walls, the population waved and celebrated the arrival of the Dardanians, shouting the name of Onus, who was reputed to be a great warrior. Onus had divine blood in his veins, and the prophecies indicated that he would have a glorious future. Onus was the son of Aphrodite, the god of beauty and love, who always watched over the safety of her mortal son. The goddess of love could arouse passions in the hearts of men, and even gods. Zeus, the supreme god of Olympus, had excessive passion in his heart, making him an easy target for the influence of the goddess of love and her son Eos. His love affairs with deities and beautiful mortals were countless. This aroused the fury of Hera. His wife Aphrodite was pleased to know that even the lord of Olympus could not resist her power. Zeus decided that Aphrodite should taste her own poison and forced Eos to use his arrows to make Aphrodite fall in love with a mortal. The goddess fell in love with ancient member of the Trojan royal family who was tending her flock. Aphrodite, properly disguised, visited the Trojan nobleman's tent during the night, and he was astonished by the visit of such a beautiful woman. Ain suspected that that beautiful woman was a goddess and knew that it was inappropriate for a mere mortal to wish to possess a deity. The humility shown by Anisus aroused even more passion in Aphrodite. The goddess pretended to be a princess from the region of Phia, who had been instructed by the gods to marry the Trojan nobleman and establish a strong alliance between the two peoples. Convinced that this was the will of the gods, Anisus gave in to Aphrodite's charms. The couple had a night of intense love. At daybreak, Anisus awoke and saw the goddess without any disguise. He was astounded at such beauty, but a great fear quickly ravaged his heart. He remembered Acon, who dared to spy on the beautiful goddess Artemis while she was bathing. That sight caused the goddess of the hunt to impose a terrible punishment on him. Aphrodite calmed the noble trone, saying that he should not worry, for he had committed no sin. Everything that had happened to him had been the will of the gods, and to her and kisses and his descendants were very important. The goddess assured him that from that union, the heir to Troy would be born, and under his leadership the seed of a new nation would be planted that would bring all the opposing ones to their knees. Aphrodite knew that her union with a mere mortal would forever be a stain on her reputation, and so she asked Anisus never to reveal the true mother of her son. Anya is the fruit of this tainted union. Anisus kept the secret for many years. Time passed, and while fraternizing with his friends and relatives because of alcohol, Aeneas boasted about his son Honest and revealed the prophecy that spoke about the glorious future of his son, all thanks to his divine mother, the goddess Aphrodite. Zeus, upon learning that Anisus was boasting of his union with the goddess, hurled one of his thunderbolts at the noble Trojan. Anisus survived, but was crippled for life. His son with the goddess of beauty and love grew up, and his strength and beauty reflected his divine origin. Hector and Paris were very pleased with the arrival of the Dardanians, but because of the rumors of the prophecy predicting the glory of Honest, King Priam distrusted Honest, for he feared that he would take over the throne from his sons. However, he also knew that without Honest and his men, defeating the Greeks would be an almost impossible task. The siege of Troy had been an ongoing episode for many years, and the last months had been marked only by battles and skirmishes. The inhabitants of Troy were going through hardships, but there was no sign of any surrender. But during this period, the Greeks didn't just stand by. Their heroes commanded expeditions to attack and plunder the allied cities of Troy. Achilles sacked 23 enemy cities, where he plundered many treasures, resources, and made plenty of slaves. Some cities offered no resistance to the invaders and were easily conquered. Their people were spared the wrath of the Ons, but others tried to stand their ground and refused to yield before the enemies. On the island of Lesbos, there was a great struggle for the taking of the city of Metha. The defenders fought fiercely against the mermens of Achilles. The defenders managed with great effort to repel the invaders. Meanwhile, from the top of the wall, Princess Paides gazed passionately at the mighty Achilles as he led his men. In the evening, Achilles was visited by an old maid of the princess, who brought him a message. She offered Pale's son the opportunity to invade the city if he agreed to marry the princess. Achilles agreed, and Pise opened a hidden door opening passage for Achilles and his men to storm the city. The mermens unleashed all their fury on the residents of the city for making the Greeks pay such a high price after stubbornly resisting in the face of a superior enemy. When the princess ran to Achilles, lest he forget the deal he ordered his soldiers to stop the young woman. With great contempt, he ordered her to be stoned to death. Achilles would never unite with a woman who would put her interests above her fatherland and family for such a traitor. There was no fairer penalty. Achilles set out to invade the city of thieves of Trod. It was a wealthy city where the family of Andromache, the princess and wife of Hector, lived. Achilles dueled with King Aeon and his sons, who fought bravely, but the king and his 7 sons died at the hands of Achilles. In this city, valuable spoils of war were plundered. The most precious treasure was Cress, so beautiful that she looked more like a goddess. But Patrus told his commander that if he was impressed by Chryses, he should see what was in the temple of Dionysus. Inside it was Briseis, a priestess, even more beautiful than the previous one. Ailes was convinced that there was no spoil of war more valuable than the precious Briseis. With her by his side, the glory would be even more evident. On the other side of the Dells Strait, the gigantic Ajax was attacking the Thracians, also allies of the Trojans. No Thran warrior could oppose the mighty giant from Salamis. With his huge shield, he brought down the enemy lines. Ajax also captured valuable war prey. He was the young Porus youngest son, and for whom he had most affection, Odysseus, than any ransom. Therefore, accompanied by his friends Diomedes and Manos, He asked that a meeting be organized in Troy to negotiate Odysseus' son for Menelaus' wife, but, listening to the advice of his sons, Priam refused to return Helen as a proposal. He offered his daughter Cassandra to Minos as his new wife. Minos found that proposal outrageous and said he would not accept that the people who dishonored him should choose his wife. He declared that he did not want a wife from a barbaric lineage, and the Trojans would pay for that offense. Greeks and Trojans again failed to come to an agreement, and the king demanded that the Greeks be removed from his presence. The Greeks dragged young Poeas close to the wall and stoned the boy to death from the top of the wall. Priam witnessed it all helplessly, and in tears Achilles had now returned full of glory and treasures. Everyone celebrated, as the fruit of the loot was shared among all the lords. When Agamemnon saw Chryses, he immediately demanded her for himself. Aeolus quietly gave in to the girl, for he had expected that the greedy Agamemnon would not resist a young woman with such attributes, but Achilles was smart and only revealed his breast to Agamemnon after he had already decided to choose Crest. Therefore Achilles got the most precious of treasures, Brises, and Crest did not know it, but they would be responsible for changing the course of the war. Achilles' wrath would be aroused. For nearly 10 years the Greeks besieged the glorious city of Troy and could not bring down the remarkable walls erected by the gods Poseidon and Apollo, but on the beaches of Island A, dispute between the Greeks changed the course of the war. In the millennia that followed, the Muses would inspire Ios, bards and minstrels who sang the story of how Agamemnon aroused Achilles' wrath, driving the souls of thousands of Greeks straight into the realm of Hades. Agamemnon was relaxing in his tent in the care of Chryses. She was his war prey, for whom he had developed some affection, displaying her like a trophy due to her remarkable beauty. Suddenly one of the soldiers warned him that a priest of Apollo demanded an audience with the great leader of the Ons. At the gates of the camp was a priest that allied to Troy named Chryses. He intended to free his daughter, who had been captured as a slave, precisely Agamemnon's favorite.